So we have three things we want to accomplish this morning, all right? The first thing that we want to accomplish is I want to lecture on Chapter 15. My guess is that'll take 10 or 15 minutes, no more than that, all right? Then we're going to immediately go in and look at Chapter 16. What I have done is I have copied from the Muroc stuff that you all have, the book examples, and we'll go through some of those. Now, we will go through those. I will tell you that it's much easier to do transitions like they show in here once you use jQuery, that we're going to learn a little later. Okay? I just want you all to know, learn, and understand that. And the plan for next week is I'm going to lecture from basically 8 till 9:30 every single day. And we're going to be going over Bootstrap every day. And then 9:30, approximately in there. So 9:30 till 11:50, you're going to have to work on the homework that you were just assigned. All right? And you know that that homework isn't due until 2 weeks from today. And the next week, what we're going to do is at the end of next week, I'm going to explain what I think I'm going to set up probably for your midterm assignment. All right, we're actually getting not that far from there. I mean, today is like day 29, I think. And with 80-day semesters, that means we've got 11 more days. And once we get that, we're halfway into the semester. No later than that point are we switching over to the JavaScript book. All right, after today, you will no longer need to bring this book if you have been bringing it with you. All right, if you find it helps you, of course, bring it. But there really will be no reason because we're not going to be referencing anything specifically from that book. So again, next week it's going to be Bootstrap, 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 and Bootstrap. All right, and the rest of the time will be lab. All right. Okay, so chapter 15 in your book starts on page 529, and it's how to work with fonts and printing. And the first thing talks about embedding fonts. This is yet another way. All right, you can go online a lot of times and you can find different fonts. I'm not talking Google fonts here. I'm talking actually grabbing a web font from either the internet or buying it and then downloading it to your machine. All right, now they do talk in here about Google Web Fonts, and Adobe has got their own also. Until I got this book, I didn't even know Adobe had them. I just go out to Google Fonts all the time. All right, when you do your project, your semester project that we're going to be working on, my hope is that you go out and actually look through this. Again, with 1,000 fonts, I don't want you to spend 6 hours looking at every font, but look through it. Really look through it a little bit. Spend maybe a half an hour or so on it. So you know what? It looks like this would be a really good font to use. And quite often when you pick one, what they will say is, this font goes particularly well with this font. So you might want to use both of them, because a lot of times what you find on a website is people will use one font for the headings and another font for basically the text portion that they put in. Again, do you have to do that? Of course not. There's no firm and fast rules on how to do this. All right. So they talk about the skills for formatting web pages, and this will be the first time what they're going to talk about in here is the fact that you might want to create a separate CSS file for print. Now, think about this, okay? Think about why you might want to do that. Okay, I take a lot of courses online, and a lot of times I'll literally do a screenshot because, well, that's pretty neat. I want to know more about that. So I'll do a screenshot, and then, I'll send it to the printer and I'll print it out. Well, the bad thing is a lot of the courses I take, the background is almost black. Not that there's anything wrong with that, except that it uses up a lot of ink when you print it on the printer. All right? And so a lot of times what you end up doing is when you set up a CSS file for print, you might want to A, remove some, most, all of your images, and B, make sure that the background color is set to white and the text color is set to black. Those are probably the three biggest rules that I just gave you right there. All right, so we'll talk about those, and then they talk about how to set up a two-column web page for print formatting. Okay? All right. So again, This is using that font face selector to embed fonts inside of there. I've never even had to use this. But I suppose if somebody were to send you a font and say, this is just so cool, you should put this on here. The biggest problem that you have is, okay, you embed the font, but unless you can make it available to others, it might look great on your page, but unless it's a freebie or whatever, okay, how are you going to make it available to others? Now, if it's a free font, of course, you can do that. All right, but again, once you get to that point, you typically go to something like Google Web Fonts. We've gone over this already. I don't really feel the need to go over it again. All right, so you know where it is. As it says, go to the Google Fonts webpage and browse through until you find one you like. You can filter it. All right, so there's different ways to do this. But again, you've already seen this, that there are upwards of 1,000 different fonts. And the reason for that, the reason you may want to do that, is if you just use Arial or Helvetica or serif or serif, then your text looks pretty much like everyone else's. And a lot of times you want your site to stand out for whatever reason. Now that said, and I've mentioned this to you before, I know I keep hammering on a lot of the same things, but let's say that you find a font. Let's say, I've shown you Roboto. So you like Roboto, and you're going to use that. Hey, that's great. Please don't make everything on your web page bold. It's just not a good idea to do that, because then when you have something that actually is important, the person reading it can't typically tell. All right? Okay. So again, you put it in here, and I've said this to you before, but it's an important site. You don't have to write it down, but at least remember it, and that is cdnjs.com. And what they have out there are CDNs for a lot of different things. So if you can't remember Google Fonts, you go out to cdnjs.com, you just type in here Google Fonts, and it's going to come up with something. All right, it says Bootstrap Material Design. I don't know, but I'm sure it's going to find it. All right, because virtually everything that you might want is in there. You can see it right here, and this is basically the way you're going to end up doing it. What's going to change every time is this, because that's the family that you're going to be downloading. All right, okay. And then, of course, once you download it, then you have to tell the system. If you end up, in this case, they're using Sorts Mill Gaudi. I don't know what that is. I've never seen that font. But if you want to use that everywhere, you already know this. Here they're just using it in their H1 tags. But on top of your screen, at the top where you should be putting in, you remember your CSS stuff, the global stuff on top, and you put in HTML, body, and you put this in there, it's going to use it everywhere. All right, and if that's indeed what you want to do, that's the easiest way to do it. All right, as it says, in this case there were 840, there's more than that now. When you use it, you should list one or more other font families, and that's typically like this. Okay, and you do that to basically to kind of protect yourself. Maybe there's a problem with a font, maybe for some reason when the user puts it on their machine, it just doesn't render. I have never really heard of that happening, but anything is possible. All right, that's why this is your fallback. All right, and again, the stuff for Adobe Edge is pretty much the same way. All right, I mean, I looked through their stuff. As it says, you go out there and you click Getting Started. They make you go through some stuff. And again, there may be a reason to use something like that with cursive. I don't know. So, jumping in then, the skills for formatting a printed web page. How to define style sheets and style rules for printed pages. We've already talked about this. That you can have a separate style sheet, for print. Make sure if you do that, you want to put media equal print. The recommendation is that you put that after your main style sheet, but if you say media equal print, it really shouldn't matter as far as the order. All right, but I'd still put it in the order that they recommend. Also notice that the media queries that they show here say print after them. All right, so these are only going to apply to the printed page. And as you can see, a very simple font, Times New Roman, background color of white. We could have come in here too and set color to black, either black or pound 000 or pound 0000000 or RGB, and then in parentheses 0, 0, 0, any way you want to do it. All right. So as it says, the default media type for a link element is screen, so you don't have to specify that for a web page that's going to be displayed in the browser. However, you do have to for print. When you provide separate ones, as it says, you usually code the one for the print last. That's just the standard way of doing it. All right. As it says there within a screen style sheet, you can specify the rules for the printed page with the media equal print. All right. Recommendations, most of these are what I've already told you. Change the text color to black, the background to white. Change the text color for headings to a serif font. You just don't want to waste this. You know, by and large, and this may not be a fair thing to say, but it's what I have found out over time, that usually if somebody ever does this and prints it out, they're going to look at it once and do one of two things with it. Throw it out, or they're going to file it someplace. And if they file it someplace, it may never come out of, if it's in a little folder, a little envelope or whatever, it's never coming out of there. So why waste any more cartridge ink than you have to waste? All right. Keep the line length. Typically with this, then you won't have to worry about word wrapping if you keep the line length to 65 or less. Remove any navigation. Why would you need that? All right. Remove as many images as possible. We've already talked about that. So here's some of the properties that you can work on for that. I'm not going to read through these. You can look at them yourselves. All right. Now, the easiest way to do this is to just bring up a web page and then do a Control-P. Don't print it out, but do a Control-P and look at it on screen. Because then you can start getting an idea of what you need and what you don't need. All right. And again, you're going to find, as we already mentioned, things like images, display none. All right. Your nav bar might be a display none. You know, you're not going to be iterating through pages when you printed them out. Okay. You're going to be going through them by hand. All right. Again, I don't want to read this stuff to you. But the stuff that's in here, by and large, it's common sense. All right. All right, so then they go through this 2-column web page with print formatting. They show you the web page, and this is it. Basically, it's the one they've been using the entire semester. All right? And then they come through afterwards, and they show you the printed page. Okay? Now, they have determined that they still want to put the image on here, which, again, is just fine. And they've also not changed the color here, which I would have done, all right, or probably not even printed that. But, again, that's their call. It's their book. But it looks very blasé, really, when you think about it, and that's fine. All right? So they show you afterwards the CSS for this, and let's just take a look at a couple of the things. So notice it's for the printed web page. All right? So what have they done? Simple font. Don't display the nav. Don't display the aside. Set the article width. Automatically have it resize. All right. Have a very simple header, and the coloring, etc., that they're using in here is very simplistic. So, as they mentioned, all of the declarations in the print style sheet will override the stuff above it. That's why you typically put it at the end. All right. The width and body, as it says, are set to auto, so they'll be as wide as the printed page will allow them to be. The font family set to a simple serif font. The display for the nav and the sidebar set to none. So in other words, we are telling them to disappear. We don't want you. All right. Remember, there's two things. You can set display none, which essentially moves it right off the page. And you can set display hidden. And that keeps it on the page. You just can't see it. You don't want to do that here. All right. You want to be a display none. The borders for the header and footer are set to black. All right, as it says, to set margins and padding, here you can use inches if you decide you want to. Because by and large, most people still print off stuff in 8.5 by 11. All right? And that's it for this chapter. Like I said, in my opinion, for whatever this is or is not worth, all right, the stuff that's in here was really and truly pretty self-explanatory. All right? So I'm going to jump right into Chapter 16. I believe we'll be done before 9 today. All right? So Chapter 16 talks about how to use CSS3 for transitions, transforms, animations, and filters. We're going to, again, look at the examples. I literally went out to the same folder that you have, and I grabbed the Chapter 16 book example folder. And also, as I've already mentioned to you, and I'm saying it again, okay, there's an easier way of doing this, and that's using jQuery. In fact, just so you see this, I probably mentioned it to you already, but in case I didn't, I'm going to quickly go out to if I can spell, to jQueryui.com, not .co. That's why it didn't work. All right, jQueryui.com. It's an ugly website. But let's suppose that I want to use an accordion. And if you say, I don't know what it is, yes, you do. You've got a bunch of questions that are on a page. You click on one, and it brings the answer up. You click on the next one, etc. So I go over here to accordion. And here's the example. And you notice exactly what happens there, right? So I go down to here, and I grab View Source. And I go down to here, and I copy all of it. It's set up so that it does not give you line numbers. I come over to here. I just bring in and paste this. I'm going to very simply save this as accordion.html just for example purposes. I'm not going to keep this anyway. Click Save. There it is. Run it. Now, if for some reason it doesn't resonate or it doesn't come up, it is referring to a couple CSS files that you might have to load too. All right, I'll let it spin for a while just in case. But you can see how easy that is. There are approximately 30 different things that they have over here. And some of these we're going to look at a little bit later. Things like hiding. All right. Is that pretty obvious what that just did? And there's different ways that you can do this. All right? I'm not going to run through these. It's funny, shake. All right? So, you might say, well, why would you maybe want to do that? To get someone's attention? I don't know. You might want to put some sound with that. I really have no idea. But just so you know. All right. So, they first talk about how to use transitions, and then they create an accordion there with transitions. What I want you to understand, and I should have said this before I didn't, but I just quickly want to mention this to you, is if we go back here, well, there it is. So there's the one I just showed you. Again, there's no CSS on it, but you can see how it works. Okay, and that was with me just copying it. Here's the key takeaway to this, though. This is what I want you to get out of this. If we look at the source, where are you? There. That's all the JavaScript. That's it to do this. And it's basically, when you look at it, the thing that says function that you see right there, that's basically saying run this as jQuery. So really is one line of code in here, it's line 13, that says we've got something with an idea of accordion and run it like it's an accordion. That's it. So yeah, the stuff they show you in the chapter here, it's all well and good. But there are much easier ways of doing it than the way that they show in here. That's all I'm trying to get across to you. So they'll talk transitions, then transforms, then animations. Be real leery with animations because I've gone out to websites where they animate everything. They got a little guy or a little gal who's walking around on the screen. Every time you go to a new page, they play with the colors, or they make it raise up and raise down, or fade in or fade out. And after a while, it's either so cool that you've forgotten what the website's about, or it's such a pain in the butt that you wish they wouldn't have done it. All right? And finally, they'll end up with animations, or filters rather. Again, not a long chapter. All right, so as it says, transitions let you change one or more CS properties in an element over a specified period of time. It says, as you'll see, they let you provide features with CSS alone that otherwise would require JavaScript and jQuery. They're correct. So if someone never has a desire, If you've learned HTML really well, and if you've learned CSS really well, and you never have any desire to go a step further and learn JavaScript and jQuery, yes, you can do all this stuff with just CSS. And they're correct. But it typically will involve you using more code. Okay? So as it says, the figure that's on the next page summarizes, these are the basic 5 transition properties you use. Again, I'm not going to read them. Notice one of them has got duration in there. So it says how many seconds or milliseconds it will take. Usually for seconds, you'll put in something like 3s, which means 3 seconds. If you put 3,000 in, it's typically in milliseconds. There are 1,000 milliseconds in a second. So 3,000 milliseconds is equal to 3 seconds. That kind of an idea. All right. So with the examples that they have over here, okay, when you hover over it, this is what the text looks like. And when you hover over it, it gets bigger and it gets red. That pretty obvious? I mean, we can go look at the code, but it's shown right here. It's the H1, so what are they doing in here? They're saying we want to use a transition. All right? And we're using that along with the hover property. So notice the font size originally was 120%, so we're increasing that to 180%. All right? And we're also changing the color to red. I guess this was originally blue. It doesn't really look blue on my screen, but I guess it is anyway. All right? So here's another one. A transition for one property when the mouse hovers over the heading. All right? For all properties when the mouse goes over the heading. As it says, a transition is meant to provide a smooth change. You can be even better with that because sometimes if it goes, it may seem too fast. Especially, again, because I'm falling into this category. As you get older, you know, you like to typically see stuff happen a little slower. So you can put a duration on there, you know, where you've got some control over how much time it's going to take. All right. The accordion with transitions, you just saw an accordion. All right. So this is what you have to add for the accordion. And this is in there anyway. But it's the stuff that's right here. The height, the transition, and what you want to do with it. Now, again, this is me speaking. If I can do what they just showed with 1 or 2 lines of code, I'm doing it that way. All right? It's just less code that I have to maintain. All right? So as they mentioned, the transition occurs when the user clicks on the A element. That's the link, of course. The transition is applied to the change in the height property. All right? And it says to change that, it uses the target pseudo class. Selects the div element, the one that you clicked, so it opens it up and it shows you the answer. All right, it changes the height property from 0, meaning it's basically invisible, to 120 pixels. All right. All right. So those are transitions. Transforms allow you to make stuff move around on the screen. And I don't mean animate, where it typically goes back and forth, up and down, or sideways. I mean skew it, rotate it, etc. That's typically the way that you use transforms. All right? So the next page here shows you the properties and the methods that you use. So unlike before we used transition, now it's transform. And notice when you do this, I'm not going to read these to you. But you can have it rotate any way you want. You can scale things differently, etc. Again, typically you do this for effect. Now, if you're going to do that, one of the things you typically don't want to do is set it up so this happens as soon as somebody changes to the page. Because unless you do it slowly, they may not even see it happening. So you might have all this cool stuff. All right. Now, I want to show you something here. I don't know if it's even still there anymore. Let's see. I don't know if this is still out there anymore. So. All right, there used to be a company out here that, you know, we've already gone over this. We went over the CSS box model a while ago. But there was a company out here that's called Red Melon. They had a 3D look at the box model. And they had sliders, and as you move them, what you saw was the margin changing or the padding changing, etc., or the border changing. And it was kind of cool because it was a way to show people what was going on. Now, something like that, that makes sense. All right? I think at least it does. But, you know, with a lot of a lot of times the stuff that's used, you just do it for effect. Maybe it looks like this by default and you don't like that, so you want to turn it around. You get the mirror image, so to speak. All right? You know, how many pictures do you see on Facebook or Instagram or whatever that somebody takes and you got a shirt on with writing on it and it looks backwards type of thing? Well, you can change that with some of this stuff. All right? So as it says, you often combine transforms with transitions, okay, that we just talked about. Why? So you've got some kind of control over what happens. And here's probably the best way to show it to you. All right? Now, would you want to necessarily do that? As always, it depends on what you're trying to do. Depends on what the website is about. All right? So they give you the associated HTML. They show you the different rotatings, etc. And as it says, the 2D transform are applied when the page is loaded. If you want them when the mouse hovers over it, you can use the hover class instead. It says, for an excellent resource for working with 3Ds, I have not gone here, but you can go to that guy's GitHub post. 3D is kind of cooler, I think at least. When you look at this, there's nothing in, especially these right here, that I look at that make me say, boy, I'd want to go out to that site. But again, everybody's different. All right. So animations. Now, one thing to realize is when you're working with animations, and I want to show you this. Let's see. When students are taking the Android class in the 4th semester, all right, one of the things we typically do, as you know, we start doing it as a class, and I let the students finish it themselves. All right, and one of the things that we do is we build literally a rock, paper, scissors game as an Android app. Why? Because it's pretty simple. People know how it's played, etc. So if I go out to Google Images, I can go out here and as an example, I can come out here and I can find rock, paper, scissors. I've used this one before. It's pretty obvious what's going on. You know, and I've used this one before. You know, because I try to break it up a little bit each time I teach it. But one thing that's in here, here's an animated GIF. Now, who cares? Well, I'm going to show you the one that I've used before, so if I can find it. And if not, I'll just go back up to the top. I had somebody use one last time and they did the Friends one. So, see the difference? It's actually moving, so to speak. And people, by and large, like that. All right. Some people find that, I don't like that at all. It's kind of a pain. All right, this one looks good. Well, let's see, I can't reach it. So you can see. But again, when you go in there and you look at these things and you run them, they will actually move. The one that we had, it was kind of cool because it was a white hand and a black hand, and they were playing against each other. But they never finished the game. They just kept going like this. All right, some people liked that and some people didn't. All right. So, as it says, when you work with animation, these are very similar to what you saw with when we looked at the transforms. Duration, delay, all right, etc. How many times you want it to run or repeat. Okay, so there's a lot of different things that you can do. To me, having text change color and move across the screen is not cool. Now, maybe in some sites it would be really cool. All right, again, as always, it just depends on what it is you're trying to do. So they show you the particular CSS for this. Now, when you work with this, you end up working with something that's called keyframes. All right, I'm going to let you read that yourselves. Why? Because when we do animation, we're going to do it with jQuery, and all that stuff goes away. Again, as I said, it's much easier to do it, in my opinion, in jQuery. All right. So it says, for simple animations, the keyframes are set automatically, as shown above. But you can define them yourself And that's where, again, for like a slideshow, this ends up becoming a little bit more complex. See that? And as they say here, it works like a jQuery slideshow. Well, if that's the case, I want to use jQuery and just tell it to use a slideshow, and boom, it's done. When we are working with it, we're going to put a slideshow in next week already when we start going over Bootstrap, and it's easier than that. It's dragging over some code that already exists and just linking your images up to it. That's all you got to do. Plus, as soon as you do that, it's automatically responsive. All right, which is kind of nice. Now, if you put in an image that's this big and another that's this big and another that's this big, and you don't scale them, it's going to look funky on your screen. All right, but if that doesn't matter to you, fine. And if it does matter, you just have to scale them. And I've shown you different ways that you can scale the size of images. All right, as it says, it's like a jQuery, but it's done with only using CSS. Now, it's not impossible. I mentioned this to you yesterday. It's by no means, it's not impossible that you could go in for a job as a web developer, and they could ask you to do something. As you know, if I was doing that, I would say, prove to me you can create a slideshow, and I don't care how you do it. I don't think they'd say, prove to me you can do a slideshow and do it with only CSS. But it's possible you could be asked something like that. I don't know. There's so many different companies looking for so many different things. All right. All right. The last thing that's in here is they talk about filters, and it says, filters let you change the appearance of images after they've been loaded in the browser without changing the image file. Now, why would you want to use this? Maybe you find a really, really cool picture, let's just say, of New York City. Let's just say that you're doing some kind of a website about places you visited, and you really like New York. And you look at it, and you're like, it's at sunset, but it's still a little bit too bright. So you could go in there, and you could add a filter to darken the background to make it look darker. As an example, that's just what came to me. All right, but there's all sorts of different things, so that would be working with the brightness. All right, you can see the other stuff that's in here as well. Now, they mention hue, and it says adjust the hue rotation of the image. Well, one thing we've never really talked about, but when you set up colors, I've shown you how to use the regular, orange, just the word orange, just the word green, or how to do it with hex codes, how to do it with RGB codes, which we haven't used much, but you can. We've even added the opacity to it. All right, but there's another way that you can do it as well, and it's called HSLA. And that's hue, saturation, I think it's light, and again, the A is for alpha. So you can set colors that way too, all right? And that's what they're getting to in here when they talk about hue. So look at the difference. All right, it's funny how things are in style, then they're out of style, then they're in style, then they're out of style. It's like, for guys, and gals wear them too, I guess. But it's like ties. Don't throw that out. Throw that out. It's skinny. White ties are in now. Well, keep it anyway. They'll be back, later. And it usually does seem to work like that. The reason I'm bringing that up is, to me, that almost looks more like black and white. It's not, but it looks more like black and white. And a lot of times people do this today. I know that my daughter, when she got married a couple of years ago, that she took a bunch of the photographs that she liked the most and she asked them to make them in black and white. All right, and a lot of people like that effect. All right. So as it says, you can use filters to change the appearance of an image in the browser. Percentage values can be expressed in fractions if you want to do so. All right. Then it says the 10 filter methods applied to the same image. So you can see in here, I'm not going to read any of these, but you can see them, and you can see the different effect. So you can do a lot of things. All right, I remember reading this article on this. This was a couple years ago. I didn't save the article. But what they did was they had this sunset, and they had a guy in there, and he was like just sitting there looking, as the sun was setting, looking at the ocean, okay? And people had put in there just how cool that was. And they found out later that the guy was just sitting there during the day They added the sunset, they added the sun. Everything else was just basically photoshopped in there. And a lot of times that's what you find. All right. So again, they've got it for all 10 of these. There's the same image 10 times, but you'll notice what they changed every time. And then there's the associated CSS. They've all used filters, but they go through all of the different stuff that was just mentioned. All right. As it says, the filters in this example apply when the page is loaded, but you can use the hover if that would make it easier. There may be a very good reason to use this. All right. So again, that's it. All right. Let's quickly look at what we have here. Okay.